Aloha, welcome back to Hawaii News Now's extended stream. I'm Emily Cristobal, and today we have another episode of the Debrief, where we break down the latest happenings in Hawaii's state government and also top issues in our communities. For this episode, I spoke with State Senator Karl Rhoads and State Representative David Tarnas, where we talked about ethics reform in the Hawaii State Legislature. We also talked about what they're doing with corruption that's been happening in our state, from the state to the city and county levels, and also what lawmakers are now doing to make sure that there is accountability, transparency, and to prevent corruption from ever happening again in Hawaii. Now, this is an episode of the Debrief. Hope you all enjoy. Aloha, welcome to the Debrief from Hawaii News Now, where we break down the latest happenings in our local government and top issues in our community. I'm your host, Emily Cristobal, and in today's episode, we discuss ethics reform at the Hawaii State Capitol, looking at recent incidents of corruption and the work being done to improve accountability and repair the public's trust in our local government. To discuss all this and more, we are joined by State Senator Karl Rhoads and State Representative David Tarnas. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to get into this topic of ethics reform. And first off, I was hoping, Senator Rhoads, you could break down what exactly is ethics reform and why is it so important?
Well, I think the obvious reason is that you don't want taxpayer money being stolen, and unfortunately, that has been happening with alarming regularity the last few years. So it's kind of a superficial answer, but a very important part of it. I think maybe more importantly is the problem that big money special interests have on influence over policy. What I would refer to as industry capture, where the industry is basically setting the rules that they're going to be regulated by themselves. They set their own rules basically in that scenario. I don't think that's it may be good for them as a special interest, but for the rest of us, it may not be the best policy. And so I think some of our campaign finance reform bills we tried to pass, some of which we were successful, some of them we weren't, but those were more aimed at industry capture, trying to clean up the campaign finance system so that everybody has more or less the same voice in the political process. And also, I think just at a real fundamental level, government needs to be fair to all its citizens, whether you're rich or poor or a member of a specific special interest or not. The government needs to treat everybody as fairly as possible. I mean, it's not a perfect world, so it's you're never going to have perfect equity, but we can do better than we're doing. And I think that's also a very important reason for ethics reform. I would just add one other thing that I think is sort of ironic about the whole our effort, which I fully believe in, and I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't have done what we did, but I do think that because of the bills we passed, there's more people in government are going to get caught doing illegal things than were before. And in the short run, people are going to say, look, it's getting worse. It's not getting any better. I don't think that's the way to look at it. I think that once would-be crooks realize that there's a high probability they're going to get caught trying to steal taxpayer money, they'll stop doing it. But things may actually get worse, or at least appear to be worse in the short run. The instances that I worry about are the ones that aren't caught. When people get caught, that means the system worked and they're being held accountable and they're paying the price for their criminal activity. It's the ones that you don't catch that you never know about, and a lot of the bills we've passed makes that easier and more likely that they'll be caught.
Just bringing up some past incidents that happened over the past few years. I mean, we have Senator Kalani English and ex-State Representative Ty Cullen who were caught in this bribery scandal. I mean, Senator English was the Senate Majority Leader at the time. What kind of message does this send to the public?
It's a terrible message. I mean, but like as I mentioned before, the fact that they got caught is reassuring. And pretty much they got caught under the old rules, and we just made the rules tighter. So we're moving in the right direction in that regard. But the ones I worry about are the ones that didn't get caught, and I don't know who they are because they haven't been caught. But it's hard to believe that some people don't get away with stuff like that.
And Representative Tarnas, I was hoping you could add on, with these incidents happening, our viewers have expressed this concern of what more could be going on behind the scenes that the public doesn't know about. How do you respond to that type of sentiment?
Well, I think it's important for us to do everything we can to help the public understand what we do at the legislature. We need to improve our transparency and also be accountable for what the decisions that we make. So I think part of it is that people were just outraged that we had two legislators who took bribes to do the work they're supposed to do. They were elected to do. But that wasn't it. I mean, that wasn't all. That we also had several county officials in each of the counties get caught for taking bribes or other fraudulent activity. So there was a lot of public outrage, and so we heard about it in the House and the Senate. And House Speaker Scott Psyche said, "Well, we've got to take some action. The public would expect nothing less of us than to actually take some action." So the House passed a resolution to form the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct. And we wanted to bring in people who actually have expertise in this area and have them look at all the statutes and the rules regarding ethics and campaign finance reform and lobbying laws and see if they are strong enough, both in terms of enforcement, in terms of standards, as well as penalties. And so this group, a stellar group of people, very knowledgeable, is chaired by Judge Dan Foley. And on it, we had the head of the Ethics Commission, the head of the Campaign Spending Commission, former state representative. We had a representative of the League of Women Voters, and a former U.S. attorney for the District of Hawaii. So these are very knowledgeable people, spent a lot of time. They came up with over 30 recommendations that they gave to the legislature. Because it was a House resolution that created it, I felt it was our responsibility in the House to review and consider all of the bills that were recommended by the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct. But it wasn't just the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct that proposed bills in the legislative session. We also had ethics-related bills or campaign spending bills or lobbying laws changes that were recommended by the Campaign Spending Commission, by the Ethics Commission, by the Office of Elections, by the Prosecuting Attorney's Office, as well as the Attorney General's Office. So we heard these bills. Several legislators put in some additional bills. So it was a heavy lift, but we went through all of the bills in the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct, as well as all the other bills that we heard from those other organizations, other agencies I mentioned. And we ended up passing a majority of them. And I have to hand it to Senator Rhoads, who was at the receiving end of a lot of bills that we sent over from the House. And he was game. He said, "We got to do it." And we moved out a lot of bills. There's still some work to be done next session, but there's 2 years in a session, so that's okay. We made good progress in the first year. We'll come back and do more.
Yes, and thank you for sharing more about that Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct. I was hoping you could detail a little bit more about what those recommendations were.
There were about 30 recommendations, and they were in all the different areas we mentioned about ethics and government reform, government transparency, ethics reform, campaign spending reform, campaign finance reform, lobbyists laws, as well as the major bills that would address not just the legislature, but any public employee that strengthens our laws relating to preventing public corruption and fraudulent claims and misconduct in office. And then we also had recommendations from the Commission regarding election integrity. So they're basically in those 5 general areas. So government transparency, ethics reform, campaign finance reform, public corruption prevention, and election integrity. So we took all of those bills in all those 5 categories and moved as many as we could out.
Representative Tarnas or Senator Rhoads, I was hoping you could just go a little bit more specifically? Like what in those 5 topics that you mentioned that the people of Hawaii is going to benefit from, or that they're going to be getting from these bills that were passed?
So there was a couple bills that I thought were important that made it through on government transparency. House Bill 712, HB 712. This encourages sunshine. Any board or commission that's subject to the Sunshine Law, would be encouraged to maintain recordings of boards' meetings on the board's website, regardless of whether the written notes have been posted. And it requires the state archives to be provided a copy of any posted recording before it is removed. So you can't have boards just actually able to see what they did in their commission or their board and having it out there anytime for anybody to look at. We thought that was a Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct bill, and we'd actually passed one the year before that was vetoed by former Governor Ige, but this cleaned that up, and I think that's an important step forward in just being able to know what the boards and commissions do. Another one on government transparency was Senate Bill SB 1513. This requires any board that's subject to the Sunshine Law that holds an executive meeting so there are certain topics that boards and commissions are allowed to go into an executive meeting where the public can't see what's going on. What this bill does, it says when you come back out of executive session, you have to tell everybody, as long as it doesn't violate some confidentiality, you have to tell everybody what the action was that you took. You don't have to give the reasons. You don't have to explain what was given to you in confidence by your lawyers or whatever the situation was. But sometimes boards would come out and just not say anything. And this bill, and it was actually signed into law already, Act 19. This requires that you explain what you did.
So under ethics reform, we passed a number of different bills. HB, which is House Bill, so HB 717, establishes for the first time a prohibition of nepotism in state employment. And this is across all state agencies. We actually made a change in the House rules that govern how we operate in the State House that also prevents nepotism and hiring practices in the State House. House Bill 140 we passed as well, and this actually improves the efficiency of the Ethics Commission, giving them some more flexibility about how long they retain records after the statutory requirement of 6 years, because sometimes they want to hold on to it longer. House Bill 141 requires legislators to disclose any relationships they have with lobbyists. If they work for a lobbyist, or they have a lobbyist who's an employee, or their spouse works for a lobbyist, we have to disclose that.
Oh, Representative, you mentioned disclosing these relationships and ending nepotism. So there is actually, we've written past stories of how that measure banning nepotism kind of doesn't really relate too much to the lawmakers. Is that true?
Well, what the Constitution sets up so that gives a responsibility for managing the affairs of the legislature to the legislature itself. They're separate branches of government. So we don't have the executive branch overseeing the legislative branch. So for the legislative branch to regulate ourselves, rather than put it in statute, we put it into our rules that govern how we operate. So while we're not in the statute that was passed, in the bill that was passed, because that only relates to the state agencies, we do have, we did make some changes to the House rules to make sure that we cover the legislative employment practices to prevent nepotism there as well. So we covered it, it was just not in the bill.
Yes, and I also had a question about you bringing up lobbyists. Can you explain to our viewers why it is important for lawmakers to make known these relationships to other lobbyists, or whether it be like other departments or any of those things that you mentioned?
As you said, people wonder what's going on in the legislature. And so what we're trying to do is be transparent. And so if a legislator has a relationship with a lobbyist, we'll just have to be transparent about it. Lobbyists serve an important role in the legislative process. They are hired by advocates to advocate for their position, to get a bill passed or prevent a bill from passing. legislators listen to lobbyists, but they have to be discerning and make their own decision. They don't follow the lobbyists and do whatever they say. But we're trying to decouple the relationship between lobbyists who also make contributions to these legislators and the legislative work that we do as legislators. So we just want to be very transparent about this. So if there's a relationship, we have to disclose it. If there's contributions, we have to disclose it. But there's some other bills that we moved out as well that say specifically that lobbyists are prohibited from giving any gifts to legislators. We already prevent legislators from accepting gifts. Now we made it clear to the lobbyists they cannot give the gifts. We also wanted to make sure that that the public understands what lobbyists do. So we strengthened the lobbyist statute so that they now have to disclose all the bills that they commented on, or even if it was a budget line item that they were commenting on, they have to disclose that. So again, we're trying to be more transparent, trying to build people's trust in our government. We also passed a bill that requires lobbyists to take training courses in what the new regulations are and how to comply. We also made it clear that during session and slightly before and after session, lobbyists are prohibited from giving contributions or making expenditures for legislators as well. And so I think, as I say, there's a variety of different measures we took. The whole overall purpose is to improve transparency and improve the public trust in the legislative process. So people know what's going on. We're not trying to hide anything. We're just doing our job. And if people are lobbyists, they just have to disclose what they're doing, who they're, what they're working on. And if legislators have relationships with lobbyists, we just have to disclose that.
I wanted to go on to, bringing back, corruption in our government. As we've seen, it's not something that's only happening at the state level. It's also happening at the county level of, instances of people taking bribes. Is there an entity that is overseeing this flow of money? And what current protocols are currently in place to hold lawmakers accountable?
The flow of money, you're referring to campaign contributions?
Yeah, campaign contributions, or also just, looking at past cases of people giving bribes in exchange for millions of dollars in contracts. Who's keeping an eye on these money?
Well, I'll say something first, and then Senator Rhoads, I'm sure, would have some input as well. This last, the Senator English and Representative Cullen were both indicted under federal law, because the federal law was stronger as it relates to prevention of fraud and prosecuting fraud cases. So what we actually did this session is strengthen state laws that are regarding both prevention of fraud, prevention of fraudulent activity. There was a major bill we passed. It's called Senate Bill 228. And it actually addresses 3 of the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct recommendations. Establishes the offense of fraud as a Class B felony. Establishes the offense of making false or fictitious or fraudulent claims against the state as a Class C felony. And establishes the offense of using or making false statements in state government as a Class C felony. So that really strengthens our statutes to prevent fraud. In addition, we passed a bill, House Bill 986, that established official misconduct as a Class C felony, and one other bill which did 2 things. It made it clear what we mean by public servant as it relates to prosecution for misconduct in office. We also extended the time that prosecution can be brought on a misconduct case against people, so that even if they're out of office, we can still go back and prosecute them for official misconduct during their time in office. So all of these bills that we passed are strengthening the state's ability to prosecute against fraud. So it's not just the federal. So now we can actually have the ability to take action ourselves in conjunction. We always work with our U.S. attorneys, but I think it's just better for us to have that strength. Senator Rhoads, you're as an attorney, you probably have deeper insight to some of these things too. Maybe you want to add to that.
I don't know about the deeper insight, but I would add on. I would dovetail with what Chair Tarnas is saying. Is that 2 years ago the legislature passed a proposal to increase the size and authority of the public integrity section of the Attorney General's office. So you were asking about who's watching out for this kind of stuff. So the AG is one. The county prosecutors, they can prosecute all these bills that Chair Tarnas just talked about. And of course, we have auditors and we have ombudsmen and we have other investigative agencies at the state and the county level to look into various things. But but David's right that anytime the feds, if there's any federal money involved, they can grab jurisdiction. And of course, a lot of the sort of famous government corruption cases in Hawaii have been prosecuted by the feds and that's the hook for them, is there's federal money involved.
Or isn't it also that they use electronic means to carry out fraud?
That's usually an add-on, but yes, what mail fraud and wire fraud, each instance is another potential 5 years, so you can pile them up real fast that way. Yeah. So I think we're grateful that the U.S. Attorney stepped up and is prosecuting these cases. If you read some articles in different media outlets, we're led to believe that there's going to be more indictments coming. And it's very unfortunate, but I agree with Senator Rhoads. Let's catch these people and make it clear that this is not acceptable. And because we've strengthened these laws, I expect we will see more indictments. And it's time to clean house. And I think that the bills that we pass this session will help us clean house.
Yes, that's so important of you both bringing up those issues and explaining how exactly it works and the entities that are kind of looking over and I guess are quote unquote watchdogs of what our lawmakers are up to. I feel like this is a question that a lot of people have seeing these cases on the news and hearing about all this money that is being passed around, from bribes to introducing and killing bills for these bribes. Why are things like this happening in the first place? What allowed it to happen?
Well, I think my short answer is greed and a lack of moral compass. These are folks that decided to do something illegal, fully knowing that this is illegal, and they did it anyway. I was appalled. But, legislators, all the legislators I'm working with, these are very honorable people. And we play fair. It's just upsetting when you have a few bad apples that choose that they think they're above the law, but they're not above the law, and it's time we stop this behavior.
Well, I would add on too that some of the dollar amounts to me were pathetically small for the punishment that they ended up getting. I mean, some of the county ones there were big bucks involved, millions of dollars, but for our former colleagues, I think it was just a few $1,000s or maybe $20,000. But I mean, it's I don't know. To me, it was really inexplicable. Why would you? I mean, I'm not saying that if you offered me $1 billion, I would accept, but I would be a lot more tempted by $1 billion than I would by 20,000. And to me, 20,000 is just like, why would you even consider that? That part to me is a mystery.
Representative Tarnas mentioned that you're not allowed to accept gifts. What constitutes a gift? Could it be not just money, but it could be like, I don't know, some snacks? What exactly are lawmakers seeing for this type of, gifts when you mentioned that term?
Sure. It runs the gamut from a box of manapua or musubi to, being subsidized to take a trip somewhere, so they pay for travel and accommodations. Sometimes it's a fancy, something you use at a fancy desk. Like things that you use at your desk. So It's a wide range of things, but I think this is a very important question: is what constitutes a gift, what is acceptable, and so the Ethics Commission is responsible for making it clear to the legislators what is a prohibited gift and what is an allowable gift. For example, we can accept a flower lei, that's okay, but the other things, if they are not allowed, it's a long list of things. But maybe a cup of coffee would be okay. But this is all where the Ethics Commission now, we've given them the authorization to do this through statute. Now the Ethics Commission needs to come up with rules and guidance documents to tell the legislators and other state officials what is allowed and what's not. Because we just want to do things right, but you got to tell us what's the best thing to do.
It's actually been surprising. When you think about it, some people just say, well, you just don't take anything. It's like, well, okay, really? In Hawaii, you can't take a lei? You can't take a Dendrobium lei? I mean, it's insulting to the person who's trying to give it to you. So yeah, there's all these rules about it, but that has been a source of contention over the years. I mean, for many years, it was sort of anything less than $25, you don't worry about it. But now that there's more of a general principle involved, it's if it's something that would influence your actions as a legislature, then you're not supposed to take it. So, but it's anything but a bright line rule, and I'm not really sure there's any way to put in a really bright line rule. It's just some things for some people would mean nothing, and some things for others might have some influence. So, anyway, the Ethics Commission has the unenviable task of trying to police that.
Got it. And you both talked about the measures that were pushed forward in the legislature to improve transparency and accountability. Do you personally think the measures are enough? What more do you think can be done?
Well, we did a lot. Senator Rhoads, please go ahead.
Well, one of my bills, I had a bill on public financing of campaigns, which would basically make it so that if you got a whole bunch of $5 contributions from contributors in your district, you would get a pretty good chunk of money to run a campaign. And that died at the last minute, and I thought that was too bad, because I think that's really one of the bribery stuff is already illegal. You just have to enforce it, and you have to catch people doing it. But I think the more difficult problem is the funding of our campaigns. If our campaigns are funded by private special interest money, there's always the issue of you shouldn't have to look over your shoulder at your donors. You should only have to look over your shoulder at your constituents. So I was disappointed that bill died, but it's it was a big lift, and it's not a magic bullet or anything. But yes, there are still, that was a big one that I would like to move forward, and there were others as well that I think would be useful to move forward that maybe David will want to talk about.
Yeah, I'll bring up another one where we were addressing, we passed out a bill. It was not successful in the end. We have to go back and work on this, and that had to do with making sure that if the public requested public records, or if a media organization requested public records that would serve a public benefit, then they won't be charged for it, or it'll be a reasonable fee. And access to public records is very important to help people to understand what's going on in government decision making, not just the legislature. And so that bill didn't make it out in the end. We need to come back and work on that because we've got to make it clear that public information, public records are something that should be accessible to people, even if they don't have a lot of money.
Yes. And finally, with our last few minutes, what is your message to the public in abolishing corruption in our state and reassuring your efforts to transparency and accountability?
Well, I would say that, this, I've been judiciary chair in the Senate. I was judiciary chair in the House for 4 years. And this is my 5th session in the Senate. We've never, ever passed this many good government, transparency, campaign finance, ethics bills in one session before, like combined. So I would say that we heard you loud and clear on your dissatisfaction with what's been happening in both at the legislature and in the counties and the administrations of the counties, and we took major steps in the right direction this last session. And as we've discussed, there's still more to do, but this was a banner year for ethics reform.
I would agree. And, I really acknowledge Senator Rhoads' years of experience in this. This was my first year as Judiciary Chair in the House for the Committee on Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs. And I knew that this was a priority. Speaker Psyche made it clear to me that this is his top priority, and the caucus in the House that this is our top priority, is to address these issues and recommendations from the Commission to improve standards of conduct. So I knew that this was a major initiative, and I also knew that I had the support from the caucus and the leadership to move out these bills. So as Senator Rhoads said, we got the message from the public. We did a lot of good work this session, and we should be happy with what we were able to achieve, and we will do more. But if you look at some of the comments from Judge Foley or some of the other members of the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct, they were very complimentary. We took these recommendations seriously, and we worked through them, and we passed the majority of them, and we'll keep working next session.
Well, thank you both so much for diving into this topic with me and offering your insight on this very important issue. I really appreciate it. You can watch and listen to more of the Debrief at hawaiinewsnow.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you tune in next week. This is your host, Emily Cristobal, and mahalo for listening.